My name is Quentin Schultze. You see it on the bottom of the book here, Quentin Schultze. I was born in Chicago, raised in Chicago, went to the University of Illinois as a student. I'm what's called a professor emeritus, which means I'm retired and put out the pasture. Okay? It's an esteemed position, so to speak. Calvin University, author of many, many books. The latest one is the one you saw, which has to do with the movie A Christmas Story, and I'll tell you how that came about. I do a lot of speaking. Most of my speaking is not about Jean Shepherd and A Christmas Story. It's about communication-related issues, problems, concerns, what's going on with the media and the news media and all that stuff. And especially about the intersection of religion and communication. That's the area that I'm really an expert in and have published a lot of books. And then I'm a rascal. And by that I mean, similar to the way Jean Shepherd was, I think outside the box. I ask unusual questions. I move in areas that people don't normally move in to study, to talk about, to write about. Okay, so I'm not a typical professor who just stays in a narrow little expertise and says what the other professors want to hear. So what I have done is gone to the movie A Christmas Story and pulled out the life lessons. Now, why do I call these secrets, these life lessons in the movie? Because Jean Shepherd had a way of developing his stories which was extremely unusual. And all of his stories work on two levels. This is going to fascinate you. So his stories are not just about what they appear to be about. And that was very intentional. And in fact, he got that idea from Indiana and from Chicago, and an approach to humor that came about in the Chicago, Northwest Indiana area many, many years ago, which as a young man studying humor, thinking he might go that direction, he became acquainted with that approach to humor. So there he is on the left. You've all seen pictures of him one kind or another. That's Gene. He lived from 21 to 99. The last time that I communicated with him was about 2 years before he passed away. He sent me a letter, and he said, Quinn, that's my nickname, Quinn. He said, Quinn, I'm working on a character right now based on you. And the character, this letter is phenomenal. He said, it's going to be Quasi, that's QW, Quasi Quentin's used car dealership. Now, when I just drove up here with my grandson, Elliot, who's helping me out today, we came up 41 from the highway, and you have all those used car dealers. And Gene loved to put used car dealers in many of his movies and stories. So I called him up. I said, Gene, what are you talking about? Quasi Quentin's used car. I've never sold a used car at a dealership in my life. He said, no, but all professors are like used car dealers. Because they take old stories and old material and old ideas and old theories, nothing's ever really new, and they just recycle it. They give it a new name, come out with a new textbook, sell a bunch of copies, make students learn it, but we've known that stuff all along anyway. That's what you do. See, that's the way Gene was. And even though in a sense he was putting me down, he was trying to get at a truth about how professors are and about how higher education is. I have a PhD, and as Gene would say, piled higher and deeper, a PhD. And that's Gene over there in the movie A Christmas Story. This is his wife, his fourth wife, Lee Brown, and kept him more or less under control. The three previous wives couldn't. Nobody else could. I had my run-ins with him, and I'll tell you about some of those. He was an irascible guy, if that makes any sense to you. Very opinionated, but brilliant. Brilliant storyteller. One of the best storytellers in the United States in the 20th century. I get a PhD from the University of Illinois in Champaign, and I start studying communication, and I realized that the most potent form of human expression is storytelling. If you can tell a story well, You can engage an audience. You can entertain an audience. You can inform an audience, hence I use stories a lot in my teaching. You can persuade an audience. But so much of our communication depends on the ability to tell stories. And I wanted to learn how to tell stories well. And in Chicago, growing up, I would listen late at night on the radio to New York, a station, WOR radio in New York, and Gene Shepherd was on at night. And especially in the winter, I could pick him up with no trouble, and I could listen to his storytelling. And then I began reading some of his essays, his short stories, his books, and I figured out that this guy is a phenomenal storyteller, and I wanted to learn storytelling directly from him. You can read all the books you want about how to tell a story well, but it won't necessarily make you a good storyteller. But if you are able to learn directly from somebody who's really good at something, then you're going to become much better at it. So I reached out to him sometime in the late 70s or very early 80s. I sent him a note because we were both ham radio operators, and I looked him up in the Federal Communications Commission database, got his home address. I don't even remember which home it was, where, when, back then, and I sent him a note and I said, you don't know me, I'm a professor of communication, I want to learn storytelling from the best, and I think you're about the best there is. And he wrote me a note back, perplexed that a professor would take an interest in him. Because in general, he was not taken seriously by intellectuals, by professors, by the literary community, and so on. We got together. I invited him to teach with me. We taught storytelling. And I learned from him that all of his stories are parables. If you don't remember anything else, you remember this, and it's going to change your whole life with respect to Gene Shepherd and probably with respect to your own storytelling. A parable is a story that works on two levels. Most people only think of parables when they think of the New Testament and they think of Jesus. Jesus told parables. You know, some wise dude would come to Jesus and say, hey, we'd ask him a tough question to try to trick him. And instead of giving a direct answer, Jesus would tell a story. And you either got it or didn't get it, what the meaning of the story was. Parables work on two levels. They are about everyday life, but they have these deeper meanings. And the deeper meanings are the meanings that Gene Shepherd was always going after, because he considered himself a kind of philosopher of life, sometimes even a theologian about life. He believed that he understood human nature, he understood the world, he understood what things happen, why they happen, and with this special understanding that he had, he would tell stories that would get at these deeper truths about the human condition, but he would use everyday stories. And these everyday stories came mostly out of his experience, including his experience growing up here, or they came out of things in the media. So he would see a newspaper article and he would clip out a story about some crazy thing that some guy swallowed a yo-yo. And so he would clip that out and keep that and say, sometime I'm going to tell a story about a guy swallowing a yo-yo. Now, why would someone even put a yo-yo in their mouths? See? And what does that say about human nature? Or the stupidity of people? Or what does it say? See, he's trying to get at the philosophical. When you tell stories, Gene said to me, there are two things that are especially important in these parables. One is you want to create anticipation. You want to have a sense of how that story is going to end. So once he starts telling the story, you wonder, where is this going to go? Where is it going to go? That anticipation is critical, he said to me. When you think about it, anytime you get involved in a story that he concocted, it grabs you pretty quickly. It seduces you into it, and you want to know where it's going to go. And that's part of the genius in the movie A Christmas Story. So you've got to have anticipation. The other thing, from his point of view, you have to put in the story a lot of particulars. These are particular things that people can identify with. So he grew up in this area, as you know, not far from here. And he traveled around these streets and ran around these streets and drove bikes around these streets and went in and out of his house, one of those early prefab houses. And he learned a lot about life, and he had all of these friends, and he had teachers and so forth. These become the particulars. And he would take those particulars and he would turn them into the names of people and places and kinds of events. So he was not an historian. He was not doing autobiography. He was taking these bits and pieces, these things that gave his story special relevance to people, and then he was converting those into these parables. So there is no quasi-Quentin, right? But he's got an idea based on my name, and this is what he would do all the time. So he had a teacher here, Miss Schultze, and she ends up, at least her name ends up, in the movie A Christmas Story. Incidentally, it was not Miss Schultze in his original telling of the story. He worked that in later. He kind of liked that name and the meaning of the name. So this is the way he operated. He took bits and pieces and moved them around. Let's take the Bumpuses, for instance. This is really a tragic story. He loved that name Bumpus because it sounded like bumpkin, like some rural hick. And then he had this friend, classmate, whatever, Delbert, and he says, I like that. That's kind of hicky too, like a hick. And these Bumpuses are hicks. They're like hillbillies, see? So Delbert Bumpus. And without any respect whatsoever for the actual Delbert Bumpus or the Bumpus family, or like no respect for me, Quentin, he goes ahead and he uses this and converts it for his purposes into this kind of hillbilly. When in fact, as I say in my book, the real Delbert was a distinguished veteran. So he would do this all the time, these particulars, the anticipation in the stories and the particulars. But the particulars were based on things from the media, from friends, stories he heard, stories I told him, whatever, about my life in the Chicago area, and then he would concoct these things using real names and places. The sorry state of affairs about this is that if you look at what people say about how he did this, they often think that he was telling real stories about his actual life. And so he's got this figure out there that people call Shep, for shepherd. And online you can go, and there are all these Facebook groups and all that follow all of the stuff about Gene Shepherd. Shep, they call him. And any time that Gene would tell a story in first person, they would think he was talking about himself in his actual situation, typically growing up in the Hammond, or as he called it, Holman area. This has led to all kinds of confusion. But I learned early on from him as we began teaching together what he was trying to do with these parables and how he would take particulars from here and there. But if anyone ever asked him, well, you're just talking about your own life growing up, he would get upset, angry. He would put people down. He could be a very critical, nasty person. And like the old man in the movie, he had quite a vocabulary of profanity and obscenity. In fact, it's not only the old man's language that's still hanging out over Lake Michigan. Gene Shepherd's language is still hanging over there. And I tell you, if you go to the Art Institute in Chicago and you walk slowly down the aisles with the Degas and all the great artwork there, but you listen carefully, you will hear Gene Shepherd's language and the old man's language coming in, because it's still moving around like lake effect snow into the Art Institute in Chicago. So you see what I'm doing here? I'm using Gene Shepherd's own storytelling techniques that I learned from him to tell you stories about him. When I got together with Gene on this, I thought to myself, I've got to somehow narrow it down a little bit if I'm ever going to continue to teach about this when he's gone, or if I ever write something up about it. And I didn't know if I ever would or not. I thought I would probably not ever write anything about this. But at any rate, I did. And so with Gene, teaching with him, I had 24 life lessons. In other words, if you said, what's his philosophy of life? What's his worldview? Or his theology, if you want to put it that way. I would say there are about 24 aspects to this that we talked about. And then I took 20 of them, because that's a nice round number, and put them in a book. So the 20 universal life lessons, short chapters, one about each one. And I wrote this last year, figuring I'm not getting any younger. I'm in my 70s. I've got all this material. Nobody else has it. And I thought, all right, I will go ahead and write it up. But I'll write it up not about Gene Shepherd in general or his life in general. Trying to ferret out what's true and not true about his life is very, very difficult, as I suggested to you. So let me explain that along the way. Before I do, a couple of other things. You know from around here these names and places that he took from, like he was going to take from me this quasi-Quentin thing, right? And so that's the way he was operating. So that's one level of the parable. The particulars, the things that people will find of interest. What was it like in 1940 when the movie approximately takes place? And they would put particulars in there and the like. All right. And then you have the life lessons underneath. And here's the thing to think about. The clues to each one of these universal life lessons, the clues are offered by the older Ralphie, which is Gene's voiceover. So when he would write, Gene would put that in very easily. He wrote first person. He often said to me, I want to write like Mark Twain, first person. That's an American humor way of doing it. But then when it came to movies, what does he do? Because he's got the younger Ralphie, so he's got to have the younger Ralphie thinking what the life lesson is now that he's an older adult. What have I learned from life about BB guns? What do they represent? Or about leg lamps? Or who knows what? What have I learned about life? See, so the older Ralphie, the voice of Gene, comes in and gives us the clues. And if you watch the movie with that in mind, you listen carefully to what Gene is saying and realize often when it's funny, it's the life lesson. It's the irony, the difference between what Ralphie thinks and what reality is. This is probably the most viewed image from the movie because it's used in Warner Brothers publicity. And there's Ralphie. He's about to get pushed with a black boot, an authoritarian black boot. There's a lot to say about that. Down the slide after he fails to get out to Santa that he wants the Red Ryder carbine action, so forth. Okay. So he's looking up, this innocent little kid, and he's about to get pushed down. And what does Santa say? You'll shoot your eye out, kid. And so repeatedly, Ralphie, going after his dreams, gets thwarted. And Gene used to say to me, you know, Quinn, if you don't live your life with dreams, you will not have an interesting life. You have to have dreams and you have to want to pursue those dreams. So he had a dream of becoming this world-renowned storyteller. And anybody that would seem to get in his way he didn't like. Or anyone who seemed to be a better storyteller than what he was, he would often tell people he had never heard of them, even if he had, or he would criticize them, to put them down, to build himself up, because he wanted to pursue dreams. So the first life lesson was in tune with Gene's view that you have to pursue your dreams. Pursue your dreams. And Ralphie's trying to pursue his dream of getting that rifle. From the very beginning, when you see him looking into the Higbee's department store, probably around here would have been like the Goldblatts, right? And so he's looking at that and he wants that. His desire is there. Oh, he's reading from the poster about Red Ryder. Oh, I've got to have it, I've got to have it. He is becoming obsessed with getting it. His dream is sinking deep into the very roots of his soul. And he's got to have it. And Gene believed that part of what makes human beings is that they dream. And then they want to pursue those dreams. That's just the way it is. And he was very negative toward the people around him in his life who did not have dreams and did not want to pursue those dreams. He thought those are the people in society that don't produce anything of significance or value because they don't have those dreams to pursue, as he did in his own life. He had dreams about piloting. He became a pilot. He had dreams about cars. He was a huge car fanatic. Had an opportunity to really move ahead with a career in car dealership in Ohio, but passed that up and decided, based on some experience he had with radio, where he did pretty well in the Cincinnati area, that he would go ahead with radio or the entertainment industry instead. So life lesson number 2 from the book, I want you to see how these two work together, is curtail your obsessions. Curtail your obsessions. So Gene would say, we have these dreams, we pursue these dreams, but doggone it, those dreams can get out of control. When they settle deep into your soul, and you gotta have something, you start to be in deep trouble because other things in your life are not taken care of. And people get hurt. You become obsessed. It's a great word to think about this. Curtail your obsessions. Keep them as dreams, but don't let them become obsessions. Okay? This is the crate that the leg lamp comes in, and you can see here partly the fragile. His end up because it was made a little too large by the prop people, and they couldn't get it through the door, so they had to cut part of it off, and they didn't have time to re-stencil it, so it just says his end up. And then I put this up here. I'm tying this all into obsession now, remember. This fragile, because the old man is not very smart. All right? Mom is much smarter. Mom is the one that knows the answer to the question in the newspaper contest puzzle. All right? She's the one that knows what? Victor. And whose horse is Victor? The Lone Ranger's nephew's horse is Victor. He says Victor, and she says, everybody knows that. Come on. So Gene believed that men in particular think they are smarter than they really are. This is a male problem. Sometimes women are not as smart as they think they are, but men, this is especially true. And so Gene wanted to make it clear that the old man won the newspaper contest only because Mom knew the right answer, Victor. And to reinforce that, in the script, and I have a copy of the original script, by the way, which is almost twice as long as what the movie became. Oh, man. Gene had so much stuff written into that, it would never have been made that length. The studio wanted only 90-minute film, no longer, so they could show it once every 2 hours in the theaters. And so he puts in here this mispronunciation of fragile. Oh, he says, must be Italian, right? Must be Italian, right? And she says, no, I think it says fragile. So we're moving into the obsession. From the second that he sees this leg lamp, his obsession has gone deep into his craw. He is in love. He's been snookered by this babe whose leg is pulled out of that crate. See? And, oh, man, he goes crazy. He says, I know just the place for it. And Melinda Dillon, playing Mom, is saying, well, can we talk about this? You're going to put this in the front window? He goes over to the front window. He's so obsessed. He's so proud. He's won this major award. And he puts that right there in the center. And you can see him putting it down right here. All right, there's Darren McGavin, and he's putting it there. It's fantastic. And then, of course, he's going to try to get it plugged in, and he's going to start blowing fuses. although he could replace him faster than a jackrabbit on a date. So he's doing his thing right here, right here. This is an obsession. He's fallen in love with that. And I'll never forget when I pressed Gene on this one day. I said, I want to understand why the leg lamp. I mean, there are all kinds of theories out there about this leg lamp. And we'll talk a little bit about that in terms of the knee-high company that was located here and their ads. Well, he said, Quinn, he's obsessed with this. It is a trophy wife. Trophy wife. Now, you know what a trophy wife is, right? You have some older guy, and he's no longer happy with his wife. His wife has become older and wrinkled and perhaps doesn't perform in certain ways the way he wants. And so he finds some young, hot chick. And he gets rid of his wife, maybe doesn't even divorce, and starts going out with this other woman to show her off, to, as he says here, turn on the neighborhood. See? It's a trophy wife. Lesson 4 is to give thanks. Now, I put this down as lesson 4 in the presentation, but it's chapter 20 in the book. Because what Gene said was that all of us are more or less lost in the world. Lost in the cosmos. We're trying to move ahead in life. We're pursuing dreams, trying to curtail our obsessions, tackle technology, and so on. But we can't do all of this extremely well. But the most amazing thing is that good things happen. Good things happen. And often unexplained, out of the blue. So a good word for this is grace. Grace happens. And Gene would often say to me, you know, in terms of success in life, it's partly your ability, your skill, and he thought his off the charts, but also it's opportunities that open up, opportunities that are closed. You know, you have 2 children, and one child you get along with really well, and everything's great, and the other child is nothing but a problem. And they have 2 completely different personalities. You say, how can this be? You know, you were there when they were both conceived, right? So how can this be? And so life goes on with all these complexities and all, but often in the end we look back on things and we say, it's okay, it's even good. You give thanks for women, you give thanks for moms, because remember, moms are the ones that solve the problems that men create. And so Randy, like any kid at a certain age, doesn't want to eat something, right? He's tired of it. They have this every day. So all they have is the same food, and he's tired of it. And the old man's solution is tool-based, right? He's going to get some liquid plumber, maybe in a screwdriver. So at any rate, Mom here says, how do the piggies eat? How do the piggies eat? Randy. Right? So the one adult in his life that Ralphie does not ask to give him the rifle is the one that gives it to him. That's Grace. Okay? Now, of course, the old man remembers when he was young and how much it meant to him. And so this scene is critically important in the movie because it shows this connection between the old man and his son, Ralphie, that's not there, this love that's not there in any other scene as the movie begins to wrap. And then at the same time, there's that loving scene of Mom and the old man on the sofa looking out of the very window with the plants there that trophy wife was in, who's gone. And they reconcile, and they touch physically, and they clink their wine glasses or whatever they're drinking together, and you know that they have somehow worked this out. And that maybe, just maybe, if there's a little bit of sense in the old man, he realizes that he went too far with that leg lamp. He could have put it in a back room or somewhere where it wasn't visible and just turned it on occasionally to gape with delight at his major award. But he didn't have that in him. Thanks for watching, and if you'd like a copy of my book, I'll put a link down below. You can subscribe to this YouTube channel there too. And please, if you'd like a personal copy while I still have them, if there's a link down below, you can order a copy and I will sign it. Your friends and family will open the book and see it's signed just for them. In fact, tell me how to sign it. Thanks so much.